His talk will be Connecting the Digital to Analog. Please welcome Brian Suda.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Thank you very much for having me. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about connecting the digital to the analog. And really what I want to talk about, hopefully for the next 30 minutes or so, is try and convince you that for certain applications, paper is probably a better medium than electronics or your phone, definitely for some things. As Gavin was saying, my name is Brian Suda. My website is suda.co.uk. My Twitter handle is there as well. Feel free to ask any questions. I think they'll collect them all at the end. And if you have anything you want to say, just send me a message. A little bit about myself. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in the US, where I studied computer science. After that, I was working for a small web development firm, and there was 4 or 5 of us there. So I was kind of responsible for front-end development, back-end development, some of the user experience, some of the design, even a little bit of business development here. I mean, everybody wears a lot of different hats when you're a small company. So I did that for a year or two, and then I moved up to Edinburgh in Scotland, where I studied, again, computer science. It was a great city. I love it. After that, I was slowly making my way back to St. Louis in the US, and I stopped off in Iceland. And I've probably been there almost 10 years now. And in that time, I've worked for lots of different companies, again, wearing lots of different hats. The first place I worked for was sort of an enterprise software company. And I think my official title there was consultant. So I was kind of put on loads of random projects here and there. And later on, I'll show you one of the case studies of one of the things we were working on. After that, I was working for a small startup company doing text analysis. So we were working with video game companies who had massive community forums. We post thousands of posts every day. And there was no feasible way that their staff could actually read through and manage all of this. So we had written some software to do natural language parsing to figure out what all this qualitative data that people were giving us really meant. We were trying to put it into a quantitative form, something we both could visualize and quantify to help these organizations with their work. That went really well, and after that, I was working in the education sector, trying to improve the way that education and teaching was going on in Iceland. And again, we were doing this through qualitative and quantitative surveys. So if anybody has any questions about any of that, you can come find me in the break. I'm happy to chat about that more. But at the moment, now I'm doing more freelancing projects, and I'm working with another video game company to help figure out, again, qualitative and quantitative data about their users. But that's not really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about moving concepts from the digital to the analog. I think I really like this Venn diagram for lots of different reasons. It describes both, I think, what I do, and probably what a lot of you guys do as well. We've learned today quite a lot about sort of the scientific parts about user experience. We know about goal-oriented, how to conduct code design. There's a lot of science and rigor to a lot of these things. Fitts law, goal-oriented models, things like that. But there's also a huge aspect of sort of art. We need to be able to listen. We need to be able to ask the right questions. We need to know when people are engaged and when they're not, and kind of move things along or spend extra time on it. And where these two things overlap is labeled as wonder. So hopefully today, the next 30 minutes or so, I can wonder and give you guys a bit of wonder, and hopefully you'll take some interesting things away from this conference. This is one of the projects I like to show off that I did a few years ago for myself. And I kind of challenged myself to see if I could fit an entire year calendar onto a single business card. And this is kind of what I came up with. I can show you how it works here. Say we want to figure out what day of the year Christmas is on this year. We go down here to the number 25, and then we go up to December, and there's a little tiny F there. So we know that Christmas this year is going to be on a Friday, so we're going to have a long 3-day weekend. Next year, 2016, you go to the 25, you go up to December, and we can see that it's on a Sunday. So once you kind of figure this out, you can figure out when your birthday is going to be on. Is it going to be a long Friday or Saturday for your birthday? Maybe it's an anniversary. Maybe it's another special event in your life. Now, this is absolutely a horrible calendar if you're trying to figure out when you need to make your next dentist appointment or which sessions I want to see at a conference. But that's okay, because that wasn't the point of this calendar. When I designed this, I had one goal in mind, and it was to try and figure out what day of the week any day of the year is on. And I kind of show this off because a lot of the things I do, and hopefully you guys work on as well, that's really the point. We need to figure out what is the story we're trying to tell, or what is the point of this project, and put a laser focus on that and do the best possible job. I've got a bunch of these as well, so if anybody wants one, you can come find me in the break. A few years ago, a friend of mine and I, we did a Kickstarter project to create beautifully letterpressed topographic notebooks. And it did really, really well. And this was sort of our first foray into the analog world, actually producing something. This is the first notebook that we made. This is the famous volcano that erupted and stopped all of the air traffic across Europe back in 2010. And we found a bunch of the satellite photos and imported them into some GIS software, extracted the topographic lines, put them into vectors, and made a little plate and had them letterpressed. So this was sort of our first attempt both at an analog product and moving something from the digital world, which is purely digital satellite photos, into something which was more tangible. Obviously, letterpress, you kind of make 1,000 of them and then you're done. It's not super digital to analog. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of paper. If we're going to talk about analog devices, we need to figure out where paper came from. Originally, before we had paper, we had bone, clay, and wooden tablets. But if you think to yourself, it must have been incredibly horrible to get War and Peace all on clay tablets, put them on the back of your horse or camel and ride through the forest or the desert for a few days. It's not exactly a practical medium. But that's okay, because computers weren't exactly small or portable when they first came out as well. And since then, now we all probably have some sort of computer, some very smart computer that we carry around in our pockets. And paper is no different. Paper is a technology that's gotten better and better over time. These are tally sticks. They were first used as sort of an accounting system instead of paper. King Henry I agreed that these were legal around the year 1100. The way they worked is if you paid your taxes, they would go to the stick and put all the notches in. Then they would split the stick in half. So if you wanted to lie and say, oh, I actually paid a little bit more and put some more notches in, they could put the two sticks together and realize that the other side, that the sheriff or the accountant has, doesn't match up to what you have. So it was almost like your receipt and my receipt. And this lasted for over 700 years. They stopped using these in 1826. And then 1834, they realized we've got a bunch of these laying around. Let's get rid of them. So they ordered to be burned in the stoves under Westminster. And the fire caught fire and burned down all of Westminster. But after clay and wood and bone, we kind of get to this papyrus. And papyrus was invented around 5,500 years ago by the ancient Egyptians. Little after that, around the year 300 BCE, we get parchment paper. And the reason parchment paper came into existence was that the library at Alexandria was using up all of the papyrus. So it's quite interesting to think about. There was some small startup company that said, we've got a problem here. There's not enough papyrus around to write on. Let's invent something new. Paper as we know it kind of came out in China about 2,200 years ago. The Chinese had known about silk as a writing medium well before that. But obviously there's a huge trade-off between silk and paper. Silk might be more durable, but it's much more expensive. Paper is much cheaper, so there's always a trade-off. These are silk maps. These were issued to World War II POWs as they were trying to escape from the POW camps. And the reason they issued these out on silk maps, there's a couple of reasons. If you're sneaking out in the night through mud and rain and all sorts of stuff, paper maps don't last as long. Silk maps actually crumple down to next to nothing in size. but they're also quiet. As you unfold a silk map, it doesn't make any noise like paper does. The next sort of evolution in paper, around the year 600, China invents toilet paper. That was 800 years after inventing paper. I mean, you got to say that those are probably pretty rough 800 years. And then the year 1120, we see the first paper mills coming into Europe via Spain, via northern Africa, from the Middle East. So I want to go through briefly kind of a rundown of paper versus electronics, because I'm a really big fan of paper. You know, I'm a computer scientist, I love electronics too, but paper's got some good things going for it. Later on tonight, if we're having a few drinks and you spill my beer on my notebook, you know, the paper gets wet, we kind of wring it out, let it dry. Tomorrow, it's still paper. You do that on my smartphone, it might not work. So paper is good. It's more water resistant than electronics. I don't know about you, but I've never had to plug in and charge my notebook. It seems like I'm doing that to my phone once or twice a day these days. Paper is definitely foldable and tearable. You tend to forget that if we're writing notes on a piece of paper, I can tear it in half, let you take half of it home, and I still have paper. You can't subdivide a telephone and expect both halves to still work as a telephone. We can sit on it, drop it. You know, we fold up paper, shove it under a table leg. That's not a problem. It's annotatable. I mean, digital is getting better at this, but if I go down to the lobby at the hotel and hand them my phone and say, where's a good place to get a cup of coffee, the best they can kind of do is put a pin somewhere on a map. But if I give them a piece of paper, they can circle it, say, oh, you should try this, here's a great place for dinner, and it's much more easily annotatable. And like I said, digital is getting better at this. And paper is cheap. Your phone's probably $600, $700 US for a smartphone these days. That's a lot of paper and a lot of toner. A lot less printer ink, but cheap paper. So of course I made a table, why paper is better for some things comparison table. We've already talked about the first few, water resistant, electrically independent, portable, foldable, tearable. You can sit on it, annotatable, cheap. Then we start to get into things on where digital is actually pretty good. Digital is much better at replicating. We can email a file, a digital file. It'll stay digital. It's not a problem. In the analog world, the best sort of equivalent we have might be to make photocopies. Transmittable, like I said, I can email a file around the globe. It'll stay perfect. The best thing we got in the analog world is a fax machine. I mean, even then, I don't think I've seen a fax machine in years. But if you think about it, a fax machine is a fascinating object. It's kind of like that Star Trek matter transporter. You know, we're here in Manchester. I can stick a piece of paper in a machine, and maybe in New York or Sydney, Australia, that piece of paper will come printed out on the other side. I'm really looking forward to sort of 3D fax machines. Scan this and print it out over there. Resolution-wise, your smartphone is probably 500 DPI at best. I have a quick search online, and we can find printers that do 5,000 DPI. It's an order of magnitude better on paper resolution than on screen. File format agnostic. You know, I've never had my notebook say, I'm sorry, this pen does not work with this version of paper. And finally, recyclable. We're pretty good. We understand how to recycle paper products. Phones have a lot more heavy metals and toxic things. It's getting better, but it's not far from perfect. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this concept, the paper net. And what is the paper net? The paper net is sort of imbuing paper, these analog devices, with the internet. I kind of think of it like the slow food movement, except with data. So I'm really interested in getting the internet on paper. This is Aaron Straub-Cope. He did a presentation back in 2007 that I saw, and he kind of introduced this concept of the paper net, and it absolutely blew my mind. At that point in time, I was a total convert. He had shown off all sorts of stuff. I think the conference was in Paris, and he was showing off these little booklets that he had made, travel guides, all these things, print on demand. And I was sold. I was a fan. Now, you guys have probably seen these QR codes. This is not what I'm talking about. QR codes or tiny URLs, they allow you to go from the analog back to the digital. This is how we connect the real world to the digital world. But I really, really want to go the other way. The computer scientist in me loves these things. The UX person in me hates these things. If you don't fully understand why, there's a great website, WTFQRcodes.com, and it's just got example after example of why this is a bad idea. Even information architects kind of got in on the project, on the idea a while ago. They redesigned this German newspaper. And it looks super, super nice. But what they were, again, thinking is taking you from the analog world of the newspaper back into the digital world. And they were doing, at the time, some pretty cutting-edge stuff. Like some of the text in the articles, the words were blue. So the idea was that you would go to the website, and if you just type those words in, you'd re-find that article, stuff like that. But again, we're not talking about analog to digital. We're talking about digital to analog. So I want to talk a little bit about the first case study. Back in Iceland, I was working for that first company, enterprise software company, and one of the projects that passed through was a boarding pass, airlines boarding pass. And if you Google online for like airlines boarding pass redesign, this is like every designer's dream, you know. They redesign these, and some of them are absolutely beautiful. Like the one here on the right, the Virgin one, they've reoriented everything, so if you put it inside your passport, things still see it over the top. Really, really good stuff. And one of the projects, they said, hey, Brian, you're free. We need you to start working on this airlines boarding pass. And I said, sure, not a problem. I'll work on that. We'll just need to get a designer in at some point. And rather than just aping some designs, what I really, really wanted to do is think about changing this from a travel document into a travel guide. That was my goal. So here were some of the early prototypes. And as we were working on this project, the competitive airline said, oh, next Monday, we're going to launch printable boarding passes. So of course, we had to launch ours that Friday. And I think my design, and I'm not a designer, lasted up until fairly recently. But here were some of the prototypes. We are trying to do a lot of simple things like information hierarchy. The most important thing is what time the plane takes off. Even if you drop your ticket, you should be able to know, what time the flight takes off. We didn't know what gate, because you had to print this 48 hours before your flight. We didn't necessarily know what gate the flight was going to be at, so we left an empty box to sort of say, here's where you write in your gate. We knew where you were flying to, so we said, why not say, okay, if you're going to Copenhagen, let's give you the next 5 days' weather in Copenhagen. We even tapped into social network Doppler to say, who are your friends who are going to be in Copenhagen? We could do the exchange rate, say, what is the pound to the kroner exchange rate? So we really wanted to imbue this document, which you kind of show its security, show it the airlines, and throw away, into something that you would keep. My goal was something a little more discreet. These two ladies are obviously not local. And that's something, if you're traveling, I didn't want you to stand out so much as a sore thumb. So I wanted something more simple and more discreet. And there's a great website called PocketMod. This is the site. It's an A4 piece of paper, but the way you do it is you drag in the sort of 8 pages you want, and it makes a tiny little booklet for you, like an A6 booklet. You do some magic folding up and stuff like that, and it comes out to this little booklet. But the nice thing about the service is they give you a whole list of things you can pick from. And it's fairly simple things like a calendar and lines and dot grid and stuff like that. So I took that same design and I've put it into Illustrator. And whenever I travel, I kind of make myself a little personal travel guide, which I quite like. This is the one that I made for this conference. You can see I've got some of my flight information on the far left. I've got a little map. I've got a few interesting things like when my presentation is, stuff like that. But these are sort of easy, small, cheap, print-on-demand type of things. We did a project with one of the local hotels, and they were a bit skittish on doing print-on-demand, real-time sort of stuff. So we said, okay, we'll take one step at a time, And we just made these more discrete, printable little booklets. So they're all professionally printed. And they just left them at the desk downstairs. So people could come down and take one when they checked in or when they were leaving or something like that. Now, my dream would be to put this in a tiny little kiosk. So you show up at the hotel, you come down in the morning to have breakfast, you take your key card, maybe you tap the kiosk, smack a big red button, and something like this prints out. But because we know you're traveling as a family of 4 and that you're here for 3 or 4 more days, we might offer you a different sort of little guide than somebody else. And here's where we're starting to move the digital world of things you would maybe do on your phone or online into something more discreet and simple on paper. Because then you could take this up to the front desk and they could annotate it and draw little things. And all the great things on why paper is better, we can start to do with this sort of technology. We pitched this again to the airlines. So again, when you were finishing your ticket purchase, we would allow you to do something very similar to the Pocket Mod tool. So maybe the last step in your, after you've bought your flight, before you print out your boarding pass, they might give you a tool like this. And then down the left side, all the different choices would be internet-driven, technology-driven pages that you could put onto your little notebook. And for me, I've never been to Manchester before, so maybe I want a map of the train system. Like, how do I get from the airport to downtown? But if you travel here quite often on business, you can just choose something completely different from the list. So again, I really like this because it gives that whole sort of ramp for inexperienced people. They've got lots of options, all the way up to the sort of professional pro user. They can blitz through this and pick the things that match their criteria. And again, we were trying to imbue this with the internet. So we were showing off things like upcoming.org at the time. So if you're visiting Manchester, here's all the events and interesting stuff happening that week. Weather, exchange rates. If you typed in maybe what hotel you were staying at, we could pull in all that sort of information. So again, these are small, print-on-demand, custom PaperNet notebooks for less than $1. It's like 70p. A lot of the complaints we hear about analog devices, analog things, is that it lacks some of the stuff we can do in the digital world, like maybe zooming in. I think we can still do that in the analog world. We've got these lovely pop-up maps. So if you want to zoom in, you can just open the map up. This is a nice style, which literally is like a 2x zoom. So you've got your map, and if you want to see a closer view of a particular quadrant, you unfold just that corner, and you can have literally like a 2x zoom map. This is another one that's becoming more popular. These are printed on Tyvek. So Tyvek is sort of a building material, but it's paper. It's fully recyclable, but it's waterproof, feels like cloth, and you can crinkle it down. I mean, this is sort of the modern day cheap silk map. We can also do things like animated GIFs on paper. I mean, animation is not stuck to the digital world. You've probably seen these before. There's the clear plastic sheet, and there's a black bar, which is probably like 5 units wide, and a clear bar, which is 1 unit wide. And then the picture itself has got 6 frames of animation. And as it moves through, your brain kind of fills in the gaps, and you see the cog moving. Yeah. So we've got animated GIFs of cats being confused by analog animated GIFs. Oh, silly kitty. One more time? Nope. Oh, okay. But we can do this in other ways as well. We've probably seen this guy. It's sort of that little rippled plastic. You could put it on top of the paper, and as you move the paper, you can get some animation. So you can do some of these things, which we kind of assume is a digital only in an analog format. When we're designing a lot of these analog products, I'm always thinking about columns and design and layout. We can go with 4-column design. This is one of the things that I've built for myself Again, like as a programmer, I can type in a year, hit print, and I can get a nice quarterly calendar throughout the rest of the year. Again, it's well designed, 4 columns. We could step it up to a 5-column design. This is dogear.co.uk. They call themselves, I think, a bookmark magazine. They've got a couple issues. I get the feeling that what you're supposed to do is go to the website, download the PDF, print a bunch of them yourselves, fold them up into that nice little 5-column, and then next time you're in the coffee house or the library or the bookstore, you kind of just sneak them into the magazines and leave them there. So as people buy a magazine, they get a magazine bookmark along with it. And I love it. Like once you actually kind of fold it down, it's a beautiful object to have. And there's 6-column layouts. This is kind of what we were following when we were looking at the boarding pass, because it allows you to easily fold the paper in half, fold it in thirds so it can fit in an envelope, or fold it in sixths so you can do things like the bookmark magazine. So here's your word for the day, sexagesimal. It just means base 60. And 60 is a good number. It's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. And the reason, I mean, this is why we use it in the clock. So we can say, oh, 10 after, quarter after, 20 past, half hour, all these different divisions. 60 is a nice way of splitting things up. 8 is another good way. 8 divisible by 1, 2, 4, and 8. There's the famous pieces of 8 coins, which literally were the coins split into 8 pieces. That's where the phrase, shave and a haircut, 2 bits. There's 8 things there. Each one's a bit. 2 bits is a quarter. I think a shave and a haircut was 25 cents. Again, 12 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. That's partly why we use it for clocks as well. So these are all the other good numbers to know. But that's all great, but we haven't really talked too much about the internet. There's lots of APIs out there for this sort of print-on-demand concept. But I really like to think about it more as design on demand. We can do the printing, but we really need to think about the flow of the information coming in. So you're kind of designing real time based on the information. This was a really brilliant product, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. This was a little printer. It was a tiny little receipt printer. It was probably the only printer you'd ever own that you would keep on the bedside table. And every morning, you would set the time, say 8 a.m., 7 a.m., whatever. It would print out a little receipt of all the things that you had pre-programmed. So maybe it's, in this case, the Guardian's top stories. Maybe it's, should I wear a tie today? Yes or no? Should I bring an umbrella? What's the weather going to be like? And again, it's taking the things you might check on your phone every morning and bringing it down into more analog paper format. They had an industrial version for restaurants and coffee houses as well. Sadly, they couldn't make it work, and it doesn't exist anymore. I think last year, 2 years ago, I stayed at a hotel, and it was sort of this funky self-check-in hotel. And when I checked in, they gave me this little sheet of paper that says, you have a message. And I think they really had a brilliant opportunity here that they missed. I mean, this is my idea of a big red button that you push every morning. I mean, they know that I've got a message. This is already print on demand. How hard would it have been to say, oh, and by the way, the museum is free today, or we've got a special happy hour price at the bar, or it's going to rain tomorrow. We've got umbrellas in the lobby. So I think they missed a trick on this one. They're almost there, though. This is another company, Paper Later. Again, sadly, this doesn't exist anymore, but you could easily do it yourself. This worked just like Instapaper or Pocket. As you surf the web, you'd see some long article. You're like, I probably should read this, but I don't have time right now. You would Paper Later it. So you'd push the little button, and it would save it. And then either after you accrued enough articles or when you knew you were going on holiday, you said, print me a newspaper. And for £5-7, in the post, you'd get a physical newspaper of all the articles that you were supposed to have read the last 6 months or something. So nice Christmas break, holiday break, you can actually sit there with a proper newspaper with the internet articles inside it. This was one from James Bridle back in 2010. He went to South by Southwest and actually printed the whole schedule in a little field guide book. So that way you could annotate it, cross it off. It's much easier to sort of do these sort of things on a book than your phone. Also, I think back in 2010, roaming and data plans was a very different thing than it was today. He also did a project. This is a 12-volume sort of encyclopedia about the Iraq War. And this is the single Wikipedia article about the Iraq War, all the versions of it up until he printed it. So this is the entire history of the Wikipedia article, the digital artifact embodied in an analog form. So just kind of to think about what Wikipedia would look like if it was really printed. This is a super interesting one that I've just seen recently. In France now, they've got these little dispensers where it will actually spit out like a small poem for you. So it's really nice. If maybe you're waiting for the metro, you're waiting for the underground, you get a nice little poem in an analog format that you can sit and read about. Then we get this project, Hello Lamppost, which was sort of giving a voice to inanimate objects like lampposts, letterboxes, and stuff like that. So to kind of wrap it all up, hopefully I can convince you a little bit that there's a lot of life in paper, in analog formats. We can take a lot of the things that we do on the internet and digitally and try and put them into a format which might be a little more friendly, a little more kind of our human speed. My name is Brian Suda. My email is there. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, I have a bit of an abstract question.
Okay.
Because I know that you've done a lot of different things. What one thing would you love to work on, and why? If you had any choice and any amount of time.
At the moment, I'm a huge fan of prediction markets. But for those of you who may not know, prediction markets, it's kind of like a stock market, but for internal use. A few companies have used them. I know Google has used them, HP's used them. And it uses the wisdom of the crowd to buy and sell shares of some event. And it turns out that these sort of prediction markets tend to do much better than a small group of so-called experts in figuring out what might happen. There's no viable business model in it. But if I could do anything and spend my time, I would do it to help predict the future.
What is your favorite project that you're working on at the moment?
That's a good question.
Because you do quite a few different things.
I do. I guess the one that I enjoy the most that has the highest impact is doing research in education. We've been doing that for 6 years now. And the great thing about it is that's one of those that it's altruistic. You actually get a good feeling about it. But I mean, Iceland's a small country, so if you identify problems and say something, and then less than a year later, they make changes in the curriculum or something like that, you actually can get a good feeling because that feedback loop is actually there and it's for a good cause.
Have you done any work in Iceland where other countries or other organizations have picked up on it and then?
Not at the moment.
Right.
We've done a lot of outreach and a lot of it is just political. So.
Funnily enough. Anyway, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks a lot.